I've never felt discriminated against because of my skin, and that is not the same story for my brother.
Colorism is a larger structure of inequality based on skin tone. It is directly related to institutional racism. It can't exist without institutional racism. But colorism is a way of describing how people experience racism based on skin tone.
So colorism works on a spectrum. The whiter or the closer to white you are, right, the more access, the more privileges you will have. And vice versa, the darker you are, the less privileges and the more difficulties you will encounter.
Studying colorism and understanding it more deeply is really important because we can't fully understand racism without also understanding colorism and how it operates. You'll often hear people use the term white passing, especially in the past few years, as a way of talking about people who may identify as people of color, but phenotypically could pass as white. It doesn't necessarily mean they want to pass as white, but other people may perceive them as white.
It is important to make the distinction between families from Latin America who are in fact white families, of European ancestry, who never mixed. So in that case, those people are actually not white passing, they're just white Latin American folks. Race is a social construction, but they are construed as white, and they, often claim a European ancestry, right?
Researchers study colorism across many different groups, and what they find consistently are significant differences in either overall earnings or overall educational attainment between lighter-skinned people and darker-skinned people of the same group, even when all the other things about them are held constant.
So I grew up with my brother, who, we grew up in the same household, same parents, same blood, but because he is several shades darker than me, people used to come up to us and ask if we were adopted. More specifically, is he adopted? And he would get bullied for the color of his skin, be called all of these derogatory names, and although my parents had reassured him that his skin is beautiful, brown is beautiful, I could tell that these comments that his peers are saying to him created this inner turmoil. I've never felt discriminated against because of my skin, and that is not the same story for my brother.
Even though lighter-skinned people benefit from colorism across most racial groups, many of them don't perceive that to be true. And when interviewed, many lighter-skinned people of color, Latinx people included, will say, well, the most racism I have ever faced is from people of my own group.
So some people will say, I look white, and everybody assumes I'm white, and I feel, violated because I don't want them to think I'm white. I want them to think I'm Puerto Rican or I'm Peruvian.
Or lighter-skinned people are told, you're not really Mexican. Or, you're blonde. I thought you were white. I didn't think you were Salvadoreño. So those kinds of experiences often make lighter-skinned people feel sort of ostracized from their group. And those can have strong emotional responses from people. Those are important, and we do need to understand them, but they aren't the same.
That isn't the same as experiencing colorism if you're a dark-skinned person.
People in your group might put you down for being lighter-skinned or tell you you're not really an authentic or legitimate member of the group, but you're still going to experience advantages in terms of income, housing, education, etc. So being able to hold both of those realities at once is really important to understanding colorism.
Privileges of the proximity to whiteness among Latinx people is, right, safety from harassment.
My brother, he would get bullied for the color of his skin, be called all of these derogatory names.
Harassment by the state, the police, law enforcement, FBI.
In Arizona, there was SB 1070 where it was legal for police to stop you on the street, pull you over for the color of your skin to check your papers. I wouldn't get pulled over. We were terrified that my brother or my dad would be pulled over because of the way they look.
You're assumed to have good intentions, often that you're a reliable person. Whether you are or not doesn't matter, right? But the assumption that comes with your skin color, your skin tone, right? Your whiteness bestows these assumptions upon you, right? Whether you want them or not.
I was born and raised
in Monterrey, Mexico, which is a very white, very wealthy part of Mexico.
Historically, light skin has given a lot of advantages to members of the Latinx community. In particular, you can think about beauty standards.
Growing up here had a lot of pros, but also because of the environment. Everyone looks European and blonde. I grew up thinking that that was the standard of beauty. And I always wished that I was blonde, and I always wished that I had blue eyes. One of my sisters is blonde and has blue eyes. So I always grew up thinking that I wasn't pretty.
Historically, lighter-skinned women in particular were seen as more beautiful and therefore able to marry higher status spouses.
That was the aspiration. Hay que mejorar la raza. Marry someone whiter than you, blonder than you.
In addition, lighter skin has enabled many Latinx people to move higher in their careers if they are perceived as less different and less threatening to whites.
Media is a huge contributor to colorism and to discrimination in Mexico, and I'm sure in other Latinx countries, because what you see in the media gets normalized, and that's what people think is a reflection of the world. I worked in telenovelas in Mexico City. I was the darkest one of my family. My mom is fully white. My dad is a little more moreno, we say. And because of the way that I look, I would always play the poor characters or the help.
Yo he trabajado toda mi vida aquí. Mis hermanas y yo prácticamente nacimos aquí.
And then you have the white actors that are the rich ones.
Lots of research shows consistent findings that lighter skinned people are perceived as smarter, as more attractive, as more kind, and a whole host of other positive traits. We call this a halo effect of light skin, or a halo effect of beauty.
I was the darkest, or one of the darkest actors that you would ever see. And that's a problem.
I think all of us obviously have an obligation to work against racism and colorism, and lighter skinned people often may have an easier time naming it when they see it. And that's one of the obligations or responsibilities of having privilege in any kind of social system.
I acknowledge now that I've always had privilege. I had wealth privilege in Mexico, I had light skin privilege, so I think it's important. The ones that have the privilege to use it to balance the scales a little bit.
Correct or stand up when you witness racism and injustice, right? So don't sit there quietly, actually say something.
Sometimes that might be in family dynamics, and it can be hard to say to your auntie or your uncle, actually, when you say that about my new baby, it makes it seem like she's only beautiful because she's light, but really she's beautiful just because she is.
If I could give any advice for like siblings who have a similar situation, like be there for your sibling, talk to them about these things, have an open dialogue. Like my brother and I are barely talking about these things now. We never really talked about it ourselves growing up. Just be there for them and stick up for them.
The fight to eradicate anti-Black racism is a fight that requires that we be brave, right? It isn't something that rewards the meek, right? Movements are made of a lot of little people speaking up, right? We don't have to be big people. We don't have to be, pioneers of movement. We could be a small person who speaks up, and a lot of small people who speak up really make big changes.